In a world that's evolving faster than ever, this is a space for ideas, knowledge, and connection. Here we exchange insights and perspectives with respect and curiosity, navigating the digital age together. From the mind to the machine, from the human to the future, we're here to explore the boundaries of innovation, creativity, and learning. Welcome to the journey.
Statistical significance that, there's something there. As far as coming from a scientific point of view, I would challenge your idea that means it has to be from a materialistic point of view. Again, when you're in the real world, not a perfectly controlled world, yes, there's some limitations that you have to accept. So you think that every one case doesn't prove much, doesn't provide much evidence. If the case is compelling enough, it doesn't require explanations. So with these cases, if you add Jake Langer on to the other 2,200 cases we've investigated, and needless to say, they're not all as strong as his. But if you look at the cases this work is in group, then I think the evidence does become impressive. And we can do statistics looking at various aspects of it. But as far as coming down to, okay, is he reincarnated or not? As a whole, I think he can reasonably conclude, yeah, I think so. So it becomes more preponderance of the evidence, perhaps instead of beyond a shadow of a doubt. But I think the case can be made that preponderance of the evidence would lead you to conclude that some young children do have memories of life.
To me, this is the closest that many of us have come to, having an actual understanding of consciousness existing outside of, the current consciousness that we have perception of. What would it even mean to say that there is life after death?
Well, what I think it means is that there is a consciousness realm that interacts with the physical reality, but is also apart from it. So that when a person's physical body dies, the consciousness aspect might live on in a different way. Not to get into it too much, but I think a strong case can be made and has been that reality, that consciousness is what is fundamental, and that physical matter is actually derived consciousness. But that ultimately reality is for growth of consciousness.
This is an enormous statement. So the notion is, I want you to walk us through it. The notion is that we have a consciousness and we identify as the person that's in this physical body. The only way to understand these cases would be to say that there is some way that certain individuals, young children, are accessing someone else's consciousness from a different time?
On the face of the simplest explanation is that someone remembers a past life because they lived a past life. But yes, there are certainly other possibilities to consider, even if you accept this. There is this realm of consciousness. It's almost probably not linear. And we try to put everything in sort of a framework we can understand, but I suspect it's beyond our understanding. You could look at the idea, okay, rather than this individual continuing on and then having a new life, like you're saying, is it that somehow the information continued, but then it wasn't aligned, so to speak. So it didn't survive, but it kind of continued and then got picked up somehow by a young child. It's worth exploring the idea at least. And then there are also the idea of so-called Akashic records.
You just pulled it out of my head because I was like, this exists, right? For thousands of years, people have talked about this. And there are many people who believe that they can dip into other realms of consciousness. And for the most part, they are ridiculed, dismissed. They have communities where they, congregate together. But this is not something that we talk about, right? And here we are talking about it.
Yeah, I bring it up as one example of things to consider. But yeah, the idea of the Akashic records is that there's this infinite database of everything that's ever happened and everyone that's ever lived and so forth, and that people can, pull up a file or a file opens up, and then people can incorporate it and then either know about the past or believe they lived. Now, again, that concept, I'm not here to promote it by any means, but the idea that this realm of consciousness would include, again, material that's not necessarily surviving, but simply exists, is something.
This is not one kid in the middle of Louisiana in recent decades. For a tremendous amount of recorded history, this has been something that has been talked about, but you in particular are sort of privy to over 2,000 cases. And there's a sort of systematic process by which you kind of tackle these, right? You try and see if there's something here. One of the things that keeps coming up, and I can't get my head around this. What is up with the birthmarks and the birth defects?
So Ian Stevenson was, before he got into all this, had quite a successful mainstream career. Much of it was in psychosomatic medicine, so the interface between mind and body. So with these cases, he was really intrigued by them, and it's where the kids, not only did they talk about past life memories, but they were born with birthmarks or even full birth defects that match wounds, usually the fatal wounds, on the body of the previous person. And I confess, when I first got into this work, that seemed almost like a bridge too far for me. How would a wound on a body can show up, and affect someone even if they were reincarnated? What I have come to conceptualize, and what Ian conceptualized, was that it's not so much the literal physical wound on the body, but more how that affects consciousness. So, for instance, if you're getting your fingers chopped off as you're being murdered, that affects the consciousness, and then in the case I'm talking about, then leads to similar impact on the developing people. And leads to deformed fingers when the child is born. And there is good evidence that at times mental images can produce very specific effects on the body. And we all know that stuff in the mind can have general effects on the body. So, when you're nervous and your heart starts beating fast, and things, there's obviously a connection there. But at times it can be very specific. And the idea would be, if you've got someone who is sensitive enough that they carry that trauma with them, or that image with them, onto a developing fetus, which then makes it develop something similar. So, there's sort of a logic to it. And certainly, Ian approached those cases with the same careful approach that he used with the other cases, where when he learned about a case, he tried to find, first of all, get an autopsy report of the previous person. And in the aging cases, those were often not available. But then talking to as many witnesses as he could who saw the body to determine, does this kid's birthmark or birth defect actually match what the previous person did?
This part of the story would negate the idea that they're simply remembering or they're accessing an experience that wasn't their own. This would indicate that they actually did live through it.
It certainly gets harder to explain how a download of information would then produce proof. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't twist it and make it, squeeze it in there, but yes, that becomes less persuasive.
Although, just to steelman that argument, if they did download it and they experienced it that viscerally, and they, read it and they have an active imagination, I'm just playing with what the consciousness could be doing, then potentially it forms, but it's a harder case to make.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, you have to think, okay, if in the future someone was able to take all of your memories and implant them in my mind, did I experience them, or is it just that it feels like I experienced them? I mean, I don't know. So yeah, I agree with exactly what you said. It becomes less plausible if you accept these birthmark cases, but not states are possible.
Is anyone net new here, or are we all just recycled consciousness? Because there are more and more people, so you would think that wherever.
Hey, bro.
Hey there, how's it going? Need any help or just stopping by for a chat?
No, bro, I'm trying to do the RAM test. Can you see the RAM? Do I have to click anything or is just pull it out?
I can see the RAM sticks in your setup. Usually to remove the RAM, you just need to press down on the clips on either side of the slot and the stick should pop up. Then you can gently pull it out. Just be careful and make sure the PC is off and unplugged before you do it.
Oh, so you need to... What do you have to do with the clips?
You'll want to gently push the clips on either side of the RAM stick outward. That will release the RAM and it should pop up a bit so you can pull it out easily.
Fuck. Pull them out.
Exactly. Just press those clips outward gently until the RAM pops up. Then you can carefully lift it out. Just remember to handle it by the edges and keep it safe from static.
Oh. It worked.
No problem. If you need any more help or have any questions while you're testing the RAM, just let me know.
No, it worked. It worked on one side, but it didn't work on the other side, eh?
That's interesting. If one side worked and the other didn't, it might just be a seating issue. You can try reinserting the RAM firmly and making sure it clicks on both sides. If that doesn't help, you might want to test the RAM in another slot or check if the slot needs cleaning.
It looks pretty much the same though, but this one...
Yeah, sometimes it can look the same but not be fully seated. Just make sure both clips snap into place. If it's still not working, it might be worth testing with another stick of RAM or another slot to rule out any issues. Take your time and see if reseating the RAM helps. If you run into any more trouble or have questions, I'm here to help.
Yeah, I can't seem to get it done, eh?
It can definitely be a bit tricky sometimes. Maybe try pressing the RAM in firmly until you hear a click, or double check if the slots and contact are clean. If you're still having trouble, maybe swapping the damn sticks or testing them one by one could help figure out what's going on. Let me know how it goes.
Can you find me a video there, bro, based on this image you've seen here?
I can't directly search for or find videos based on the image I'm seeing.
What do you mean you
need to-
can't, man? You can't. You are a fucking cunt. That's why.
Now, if you're looking to replace the RAM modules you currently have in your system with new ones, you can remove your existing modules by unlocking the latches on either side of your RAM stick by depressing them like so. Some motherboards have latches on both ends of each stick, while others have a latch on only one side. Unlocking these will begin popping your RAM stick out of the slot, and from there, you simply grab the module and pull it straight on out. If you're just looking to add more RAM to your system as opposed to replacing the RAM you currently have, then you can leave your current memory modules in place and simply drop some new sticks into any open slots you have available. First, you will need to open the retention latches by pressing them down and out of the way. RAM modules can only be installed in a single direction, so you need to align the notch in your new RAM module with the little plastic divider here in the RAM slot, and then slide the module into the socket, pressing down firmly until the module is fully seated and the latch or latches lock into place. Okay, that's the physical installation process.
Right, so now I have to test it. I need a power cable. I need a screen. Alright, now we need to test this RAM. There you go. Mhm. Can I leave this side where are the cables open to be more refrigerated, or the dust can be a problem, yeah?
Leaving the side of your cage open can help with airflow and cooling, but it does have some downsides. Dust can definitely build up more quickly when the case is open, which can cause other issues over time. It's usually better to keep the case closed and ensure you have good internal airflow with fans to keep everything cool and dust levels manageable.
Gotcha.
Wherever consciousness comes from, there has to be people who have not had all these previous lives in order to justify all the population of the Earth.
Yes, many people have asked about that. So, years ago now, a professor at Johns Hopkins did the statistics on it, and in fact, so if you look at how many people have lived in the past, you have to make some estimates, obviously. There have been far more people that have lived in the past than are alive in the present. Now, the interval between lives would have to be growing smaller for us all to squeeze in. But some people have thought that population growth makes reincarnation impossible, and that's simply not true. On the other hand, I actually agree with you that who's to say there aren't new souls coming into existence? I mean, it may be that they are sort of eternal and separate from space-time, and have always been here and always will be. But we don't know that. And it may be new ones bubbling up all the time.
Or they come from some other system, enter our database. There may be multiple Akashic records. The Akashic records that are spoken about in our religious lineage may just be the library on the block. And there could be other blocks with other libraries, and there could be book exchanges. We don't know.
Yes, I actually think that if this is a reality that grew out of consciousness, why would there not be other realities that grew out of consciousness? So it may be, I actually, personally, this is just a belief. But my personal belief is that reincarnation, if it occurs, it doesn't occur necessarily to everyone. That while I think there is reasonable evidence to say that a part of us can survive death, we may then have completely other experiences that in other universes or other realities and not all.
I think you estimated that about 70% of these cases, the people that they are channeling, embodying, remembering, died from an unnatural cause, and in many cases a traumatic one. And this is something that we talk about a lot, and it did come up in our conversation about the telepathy tapes, which is not to say that nonverbal autistic children have trauma, but once you're dealing with a system that is operating differently, either because of, let's say, being a nonverbal autistic child, or having a traumatic experience, a near-death experience, it's possible that, and we talked about this with Scott Barry Kaufman, it is possible to imagine that there is some sort of differential susceptibility to really being in touch with certain parts of ourselves and possibly other realms. So, when I was in grad school for neuroscience, there was discussion at that time of, can we find God in the brain? What does the brain look like of someone who is more likely to believe in God? Like, what is the thing that makes people want to believe, right? And this is a conversation we can have, in a religious framework, but we can also have it in this kind of framework to say, if everyone's brain is different, by and large, we're the same, but everybody's a little bit different, is it possible that a situation where death involved some sort of trauma is more easily accessible to those who have extra perceptual capabilities? So I've worked with many, many energy healers who can pick up on things indeed that seem to be from another realm, or they will know simply by looking at me from across the room where there is dis-ease in my body, right? This is something that energy workers tap into. They're trained to read different aspects of a person. Can you talk a little bit about this link between traumatic death and then also kind of a heightened perceptive ability that might be able to access that easier?
Yes, you're right. 70% died by unnatural means, murder, suicide, combat, accident, things like that, which is way more than you would expect in a general population. And even the ones who died natural death, they tend to be young. So a quarter of them are under the age of 15. So it seems that the sort of life ending too early either increases the chances that a child will later talk about that life.
Wow.
And it may be that those kinds of factors lead the consciousness to sort of stay near this realm and then come back. So there are exceptions to everything. There are the natural deaths, but there may be particular factors that either lead intact memories to come through, or lead the individual to come back to this life, this world at all. Our group is starting to try to look for ways to explore some of what you're mentioning. So we are going to look into certain testing. So, for instance, people with PTSD, there's some tests where they show particular patterns or tendencies. Well, is this phenomenon like PTSD? Is it a post-traumatic kind of thing? So the plan is to then do the same kind of testing with some of these people and see if they show the same tendencies as people with PTSD. Another kind of thing to look at, there are people who have incredible personal memories. So, you may have heard about it, but you can say, what were you doing on March 4th, 1971? And they can tell you. So those people, if you look at testing how they perform, could you get similar results with these kids showing, okay, so maybe it's not a traumatic thing, but maybe it's just exceptional memory that even carries over into past life. So just trying to sort it all out.
Like my memory is so good. I can't only tell you what I had for breakfast or what I did last year, but I can remember the consciousness that I can access from 7 generations ago. A really good memory.
Right, a really good memory. Now, I will say most of these kids do not show other sort of psychic abilities, with occasional exceptions, but for the most part, they don't seem to be especially gifted in that way. So it's not necessarily that they have a channel, open channel to other information more than other.
So along those lines, what happens to these kids when they get older? Like you talk about that many of these things kind of, I don't want to say fizzle out, but when they're, older, that it sort of goes away-ish. What do we think might be happening there? And do some of them carry this throughout their lives?
Right. So most of the kids stop talking about these things at around school age, 6 or so, 5 to 7, something like that.
They have so much homework to do, they can't spend their time thinking about their past lives.
Well, yeah, I think that actually is sort of part of it, is they get wrapped up in this life. But in addition, that's the same age where we all lose our early childhood memories. Early childhood amnesia, where, as you know better than I, the brain has undergone tremendous changes around then, and you get this pruning effect, and so in any event, memories for all of us. But occasionally you get little glimmers from long before then, but for the most part, they all fade out. So it would make sense that these would fade as well. And then they kind of just go on and lead their lives. So we've recently done a study where we interviewed adults who we originally studied when they were kids.
Wow.
And when we talked to these people and gave them some things to fill out, questionnaires to fill out and so forth, basically they are doing just fine. And educational wise, actually a majority of them had at least college degree, and some had advanced degrees. And occupationally, it runs the gamut. One's an air traffic controller. There are people in healthcare. So they basically seem like everyone else, maybe actually doing a little better overall. That's some maybe depression and anxiety, but not necessarily more than you would expect from the general population. Well, first of all, some of them do still have at least vague memories from the past. In fact, almost half of them did. Nothing clear, none of them reported clear memories like they expressed when they were young, but at least some. A number of them commented on how it had given them a more spiritual outlook. Some of them, even though they didn't remember, they didn't still have the memories, they didn't even remember talking about the memories, but just being told what they had said opened them up more where they had kind of a spiritual outlook. So I think in the long run, for many of them, it was a positive experience, even though while it's happening often it's difficult for the children and for them.
What children displayed psychic ability, and what kind of psychic ability did they display?
Well, there's one case where the little boy, his mom and I were exchanging emails back and forth, and so we got documented things like he told his grandmother that she was going to get chicken pox, and then a couple of weeks later she broke out in shingles. So they're not necessarily saying, oh, in your past life you did this. I mean, they're not like a professional psychic, but there are times where within their own lives that they seem to have access to some stuff.
Have you ever had experiences with adults who did not show this memory as children, who were able to, either through hypnosis or some other mechanism, have that recollection at an older age?
We're actually quite skeptical about past life hypnotic regression, because hypnosis is an unreliable tool even for memories in this life, which is why they're not allowed in courtroom testimony. At times it can be amazing, and people can remember license plate numbers from crime scenes or whatever. But a lot of times the mind just fills in the blanks. And then it's very hard for someone to distinguish a memory or did my mind just make it up. So with occasional exception, or a few exceptions, I think there's most of non-regression cases do not provide evidence of. Now, the larger question of adults. So we study kids mainly for two reasons. The main one being is that's where we're hearing the cases. They seem to be the ones most likely to report memories of a past life. But also with adults, adults can be exposed to all kinds of information. In fact, there have been cases with hypnosis where they've been re-hypnotized the person, asked them where they can learn that, and they said in the book they had read 10 years before and completely forgot it. So we all get exposed to a lot. So, you'd be pretty comfortable that a 2-year-old is not exposed to the life of one particular pilot who was killed back in 1942. But for adults, it's really. So sometimes people can, not necessarily that they know about one particular deceased individual, but they can give you information from a past culture that seems mind-boggling, but you can't say for sure whether they had learned it.
Is there any reason that children who are remembering past lives, in theory, should only remember past lives from the country that they live in?
Well, there are exceptions to that, but you're right. Most of the kids do remember a life from the same country and sometimes from quite close by. And also they tend to remember recent lives. I mean, James Langer is actually an exception because his was 50 years. But a lot of times it's the average is 4.5.
Wait. Hold on. Wait. What?
They are describing very recent lives. Now, if it's really recent, it's easier to verify than one that's from 100 years ago. So I mean, there may be some sampling issues.
But the plane of consciousness does not have, in my mind, it's kind of like the God I believe in. The plane of consciousness that I would understand does not have a preference for language or location necessarily, right? I mean, unless we are talking about some sort of, again, this would be outside of our current perceptual understanding or analysis of time and space, but that there is some sort of closeness, right? That in some way is more or less accessible. But in theory, I mean, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, when people do past life regressions, you can find yourself anywhere around the world, but you're always going to speak in the language that is, in theory, your native tongue. I'm sorry, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what it would look like for 4.5 years. Do you mean like someone dies and then right away they're in somebody else's body?
There are cases like that, literally. For intact memories to come through to a new life, it has to be one that is, or almost always has to be one that is close in some sort of way, is either close in time or close in distance or close in identification. I identify as American. So there are patterns or ties or something that have the person come back to a kind of a similar life to what they went through.
Well, I just wanted to continue this kind of line of thinking, because if there don't have to be rules about it, right? Which there can be observations and there can be tendencies, but there don't have to be rules about it. So as you talked about with Scott Barry Kaufman, if there is something encoded in some way, whether that is something, it could be epigenetic, but let's just say that there is something encoded that in theory makes some more able to access things than others, right? And that's a very vague collection of genetic information I'm sort of saying is passed on. There's no reason that couldn't allow access to something within one's lineage, especially if we're talking about any sort of genetic or epigenetic transmission.
Right, so are you suggesting it might be that the memories come through that way? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying either the memories or the ability to access other aspects of consciousness, that if we're talking about there being a spatial or temporal or spatiotemporal, relationship of this, I don't have a problem saying that for certain people, this may occur in their direct lineage because there is something in their direct genetic or epigenetic information that is allowing them to have access to that in special ways, which doesn't have to be true of every child you look at, because we are talking to you and you're this amazing person who gets to entertain these things.
Well, right. So, yes, I mean, there may be a genetic propensity to be able to remember past life. And you're right, there is the question of epigenetic transmission of trauma. You probably know those, I do, but there's a study with mice where they associated a shock with, I think, sound or smell or something. And then not only did their offspring get anxious with the smell, but even their offspring did.
I can tell you it's true from those of us who have grandparents who fled Eastern Europe, and there's all these incredible studies about my 23 chromosomes, right, that my mother gave me were in my grandmother when she was fleeing, and there's all sorts of interesting stuff there. But I think that plays into what you've reported, in terms of trauma too.
But the other thing I'll point out is some people have wondered are these seeming past life memories is a genetic memory? And the short answer is no, because first of all, to inherit the genes that have the memory, you've got to be a direct descendant, and in most of these cases that's not true. And the other is, as we talked about, 70% of the kids have memories of dying in the past life, which of course would have been after the person passed on.
If you were to take off your Dr. Tucker hat just for a second, and you and I are having a cup of tea, and we're just hanging out and we're just talking, can you, in the plainest terms, explain to me, with your understanding of the world and of science, what is actually happening here?
I have become quite convinced that there's more than just the physical world, that there is this element or realm of consciousness, first of all, and that we all have a piece of it. What it looks like to me is that there are times when the consciousness comes back to this same reality in a young child. And again, there may be various factors that cause that to happen. I'm not saying that's what typically happens. That may not be the sort of the normal process, but in these cases, it seems to have happened. And that doesn't give us all the answers, but it does, I think, let us consider, again, that the materialist view is simply incomplete, and that there is this piece that is overlooked, that this consciousness piece. And, when I was saying consciousness is fundamental and matter is derived from it, that's actually a quote from Max Planck, who is the father of quantum theory. So, we're in pretty good company of considering the idea that not only is there more than we're aware of, but that actually before this all comes out of this consciousness.
Well, I mean, Planck and all of those guys would even go so far as Thomas Campbell goes, as to say that consciousness has a source, and that source is all of the things that, in theory, we use the human word love to describe, right? Coherence, which is something we can measure physiologically, right? Physiological coherence, homeostasis, feeling connected, feeling loved, feeling held. Those are exactly the words that religion and mystics for thousands of years have tried to convince people to tap into in order to have more cohesion in their life. So I wonder, can you speak a little bit to what does this mean if we extend this notion of consciousness to there being an even larger consciousness that is creating our reality as we know it? For some people, they call that God. I'm not so hung up on terminology.
Yeah, and it does get complicated how much agency we have, versus God or whatever term you use in creating it. I I happen to believe that we do have agency and that we're all creating. But anyway, they talk about agent-dependent realities that each observer, or they use the term agent because we have more agency than just observing, but that each agent has their own reality. It's, they all get put together and it looks like this one reality that we have. But actually, there are all these separate pieces that go together. But that we're all on this journey together is what I would say. That, whether there's one sort of large mind or consciousness, it shows that the universe and the reality, it doesn't have to be meaningless, that there is meaning. We're not just a random collection of molecules and it's pointless and meaningless and nothing. But I think, certainly not how I like to view it, I think that we can find meaning in our lives and create meaning in our lives as part of this larger picture that we only get once.
When we had Thomas Campbell on, he described his introduction. He was a young grad student who was studying physics, and he was introduced to transcendental meditation, which we know a lot about. It's actually one of the forms of meditation that we know the most about, I think, from a kind of scientific and physiological perspective. And the very first time that he tried transcendental meditation, he was shot off into another plane of consciousness. He was not on drugs. He does not believe in drugs. He experienced a reality that was not this reality. And what he described started happening, and it happened in one very specific day. He started seeing what looked like cotton candy on all of the trees. And it was connecting between everything. And he said to someone, "What is happening with these trees?" And the person said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And what he came to understand was that by tapping into this other realm of consciousness, some of us are able with ease to see, for lack of a better word, the energetic properties of everything that exists, not just living things. He could see electrical equipment that had charge coming off of it, right? And I wonder, can you speak a little bit, because this gets into a realm that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, of saying we are energetic bodies, that there is an understanding of us as energetic beings, that once you dip into other forms of consciousness and other understandings of our human experience, it can transform the way that we literally see the world and the way that we behave in it and the way that we function. And this is something Jonathan and I are so interested in. What if this, for many people, is that missing piece? I mean, you're a psychiatrist, a lot of things ail us. We have epidemics of anxiety, of depression, of trauma, of overdiagnosis, of underdiagnosis, ADHD, all these things. And for many people, in particular people who have been at the depths of despair, many people say that the thing that allowed them to climb out of that hole was an understanding that there is something bigger than us, right? And for many people, that's finding sobriety through a higher power. For many people, it's a religious experience. But we're talking about a scientific experience, right? A scientifically calculable experience of understanding consciousness as proving this kind of connection. Can you speak a little bit to all of this in terms of these worlds that you're bridging? Because many people find this very, very disturbing and they just want to push it away.
Right. Some people have spontaneous mystical experiences, separate from TM or drugs or anything else. And it typically involves a sense of all is one, that, everything is connected. There was a study of cancer patients who were experiencing death anxiety, where they were given one dose of psilocybin, which is psychedelic and magic mushrooms, and it erased their death anxiety. These things are significant, and it doesn't mean we should all go out and do psilocybin, But if we can, in our own way, our own consciousness, try to connect more with this sort of the underlying reality of connection and, like you say, love and meaning, then I think it can enrich our lives and also help us to be
Another point about our competition from the field having rates is the fact that 70% report dieting in a somatic way. And the big idea is similarly is that the consciousness system has an objective for its own existence, and that we're moving towards the sense of homeostasis or repair and so it's interesting to think about those that died in a traumatic way are more likely to remember it. Maybe there is a healing or processing that needs to happen in their new life, and therefore they're more apt to remember a traumatic death.
when this mind will kind of or different for a lifetime, I think that's premise on this. And yeah, people have been through bad trauma, which is not to say that you try to uncover past life trauma, but I mean, it may play out in relationships or with fears or whatever. And that may be part of sort of the normal process. That, again, we all come here with various issues, to be sure. And, you know, it's sort of the journey to work through some of that.
As you've become more non-material in your approach to this life, have you dabbled in any sort of exploration for yourself, and not necessarily psychedelics, but just in terms of your own consciousness practice or connecting with intuitive abilities, anything like that?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, for a while, I meditated on a pretty regular basis, more like mindfulness kind of meditation, but I confess that's been years. But I think I have reached a sense of there's meaning in you know, looking outside as I'm doing right now and seeing the leaves and the grass, and there's meaning in giving my dog his dinner, which makes him happy, and obviously the connections that we have with each other. So I've actually come to a point where the question of do we reincarnate, and really even do we survive, has become sort of less important to me, because what is important is this life and the experiences and interactions that we have with people now, and kind of being at peace with that regardless of what comes.
That's beautiful. What would you say to a parent who may be experiencing a child that has unusual memory or is communicating to them and about things that they don't understand? What advice would you give to them?
I mean, a couple of things. One, it's good to be open, obviously, to what their child is saying, and especially if the child is really emotional about it, to let them have voice, but not to become overly focused on potential past life and start asking the child a bunch of questions, and partly because it may be upsetting to the child, but then from our standpoint, start pumping them with questions, they start making up answers, and then it's harder to investigate the case. But it does seem to help the children for people to acknowledge that they have those memories, and they may well have experienced those things, but that's in the past, and now you're here with us in this life. So you don't discount them, but you also put them in perspective that now you're with us. And then we tell parents, even at an extremely upsetting time, in a few years, this stuff is going to fade, and the kids end up developing.
An adjacent sort of, I don't know, experience or exploration. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to near-death experiences. Obviously, it's different, and also it kind of falls into this similar-ish realm. Can you speak a little bit about, if your division, if the Division of Perceptual Studies also explores things like near-death experiences, and sort of what is your what is your sort of take on what's happening in these experiences?
Yes, we do. And in fact, Bruce Grayson, a colleague of mine, has published far more papers on near-death experiences than anyone else in the world. What a near-death, for people who don't know, near-death experiences are typically when people come very close to physical death or even where their heart stops. Instead of their mind shutting down as their brain is shutting down, they actually experience sharpened thinking. And many of them will describe kind of floating above their bodies. They may watch what's happening, and some of them will then report details of the code that's taking place, the CPR and all that. Some of them will encounter deceased loved ones. Occasionally, there are cases where they encounter deceased loved ones and say, "What are you doing?" Because they didn't know that, for instance, in one of the cases, know that the brother had died. And then often there is this sense of a bright light, or that everything is light, and some of them certainly interpret that as God, and they feel an overwhelming sense of love and acceptance, while at the same time many of them have life reviews where they see where they failed, but that they get the message, basically that it's all okay, that it's all for a reason. And then many of them come to a point of no return where they are either given the choice or they're told, you have to go back, it's not your time. And then they will wake up in their bodies, which is often coming back a lot of pain. And these are life transforming for these people, and there's a lot there. And in fact, we actually did one study looking at kids' reports of the interval between lives versus near-death experience reports, and there are certainly similarities. Some of the kids would talk about when they died, essentially describing their death experience, floating above the body, meeting spiritual guides or whatever. And then there's this kind of spiritual component to the whole thing that's present. They've been reported since antiquity, but they're reported a lot more because a lot more people are brought back being buried.
What have we learned from neuroimaging of psychic phenomenon, people who are in that receptive state? Has there been sort of significant insight using neuroimaging?
Well, that's also something that we have a neuroimaging lab that we've been doing some of that work. And a lot of it is still to be continued. But there have been studies of testing nuns or Buddhist priests, deep meditators, and seeing that, for instance, some parts of the brain kind of go quiet, and ones that place you in physical place tend to go quiet, and where people seem to have a kind of a mystical kind of experience of connecting with something.
Dr. Tucker, it's been so fascinating to get to talk to you, and we really, really, really appreciate it and appreciate your work and everything that you've contributed to this field, which spills over into so many. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's been fun talking.
I really enjoyed speaking to Dr. Tucker, but here's the thing. I wish he wasn't a psychiatrist. Why? If he wasn't a psychiatrist, he could be like, oh my gosh, you guys, people die, but then they come back in other bodies, and kids have these experiences, and it's great. But I've been to many psychiatrists in my life. They all have that vibe, meaning they're chill, they don't have huge reactions. I'm freaking out about what he's saying because I think that this is unbelievable that even based on these individual case studies, that this person is completely comfortable saying, oh yeah, there's some other plane that we don't know, we don't understand. And apparently some people can experience that in different lifetimes. What? That's amazing.
He's very understated.
That's
He's
what I mean.
presenting the largest, most shocking pieces of information, but doing it in a way not to cause alarm. I don't want to stir the pot here, but by the way, kids are having memories that we cannot explain whatsoever.
It's happening. It's totally happening.
But it's true what he said in terms of it isn't about all those past lives. And people can get lost. You know, I'm glad he said he's skeptical of hypnosis, and there's a lot of time and I think energy spent on people going backwards. And maybe that provides some information that comes forward and helps them in the present moment, but simply exploring past life for the sake of past life, I've always been quite skeptical about.
I mean, look, I've had an experience with someone who was, I would say, very skilled in understanding lots of different realms in ways that I cannot. And you know, the past life regression process is one of, you know, kind of what I think Carl Jung would have described as sort of, it is a creative imagination exercise. It's really dropping out of that logical part of your brain that says, this didn't happen, I'm imagining it. It's like all that stuff goes away. And if you've ever had a psychedelic experience, that's the part of your brain that gets turned off. So in case you're wondering, like, why you can have access to things, I mean, there's lots of chemical reasons, which I'm happy to go into in a different episode. But the reason that you can experience things and it feels so real is that the part of your brain that tells you no is offline. So when you're doing a past life regression, if you are able to kind of get into that zone, in theory, we might say you're able to access things. I think the same is true of Akashic records and people who are going in there. If you can drop into that place, right? It's described as kind of getting out of your head and into your heart, into your body. And that's what any good practitioner does. Even regular doctors are doing, right? They're trying to understand their patient. That's in theory something that some people might be able to tap into, but I don't think it should be sort of used lightly, as it were.
It should not be used lightly. There's a book called How to Read the Akashic Records. It's a how-to, and I would say the prerequisites for that type of book, if it is a self-taught versus going to a class, but even if it's going to a class, the prerequisites are that probably there's some form of mindfulness experience, some form of altered states of consciousness, again, not talking about psychedelics, but moving out of your thinking brain into a creative imagination in a visual experience, having done some personal, either not necessarily hypnosis, but parts work, or where you've done creative visualization and gone on internal journeys. That book came into my life, and I met a woman who really described a lot of these phenomenon to me. And, you know, I haven't talked really about this, but I spent some time practicing, working on this, training with this woman, and I would do some Akashic readings for people. And sometimes those readings would talk about past lives, and people were very, very curious about past lives. As Thomas Campbell explains, we get the data, but we interpret the data based on our own experience. So I was always very cautious or hesitant to interpret the data in a biased way based on my experience, because obviously I can't, you know, my experience is what it is. It has a limitation to it. It was really just like setting a parameter of a search in a database. It's a meditative process, clearing one's mind, and then set the query for what you're searching for on behalf of either yourself or someone else, and then wait for the information to come.
This is outside of the realms of our understanding. What you're talking about, and I believe it's called the astral plane. You're talking about the astral plane, which is not the physical plane. This is the physical plane, right? Or, you know, this is the information that my brain is receiving about this being the physical plane.
Because it's practice.
So I'm just saying, for me, I've had, you know, a few experiences in deep, you know, meditative practice, meaning as practicing meditation. Something happens where my body feels like it's not functioning as a body the way it normally does. And this has only happened to me in very brief moments. Like, it'll drop in for a second and I'll have some awareness of, like, the best way I can describe it, it's like a quieting, not just a quieting of my thoughts, it's like a quieting of my physical being. And I think that when I've, you know, heard people who practice meditation regularly. And I don't mean, with all due respect, people who are like, listening to a walking meditation or like meditating while you're in the car.
No, there's a difference between mindfulness, quieting, observing, and then accessing other planes of consciousness.
I'm talking about people who like are doing, like hours and hours of like Buddhist meditation as their training, or people like Thomas Campbell who are like shot off into another stratosphere, in TM from a mantra. Like, I'm talking about like a practice situation. But for me, like, I've experienced that literally as soon as I have consciousness of it, it's gone. Like, you have to be able to live in that space, which I believe people like you have either practiced or have a genetic, set of genetic information that allows them to tap into that. And I do believe that of every legitimate healer that is out there. And a lot of people are healers who are using different practices and different methods, and that's fine. I'm not saying you're illegitimate, but what I'm talking about is not just like a person that like I see took out an ad in the back of a newspaper and I don't know who they are. But when I learn about people who are healers and I learn what they've practiced, what they've studied, what they've cultivated for themselves and their own spiritual practice, those people I do believe are able to get to this place that I've only gotten to literally for less than a second. I believe that something can happen there that I don't understand or have access to. And I don't know that I need to, because there's people like you who can do it.
What we're talking about is someone has to go somewhere and they're in with their consciousness and access another plane. Now, people get pulled out of that, right? It's like you can go there, and then when you talk about you've been there for a second and then you get pulled out, there are a handful of reasons why someone gets pulled out. Fear, analytical mind, being comfortable in an unknown, being comfortable not having information and sort of in that real gray space and not immediately switching back to the analytical mind, which is what we're most comfortable with. And two, finding ways when we begin to switch back into the analytical mind to reground ourselves and practice staying in this open, receptive, non-rational world. Again, and we talk about this in Thomas Campbell, is receiving the information is one thing, and then analyzing the data to say, how is it valuable? So it's one thing, I almost see it like you go into the records and like you're going to collect information. You're like pulling a book off the shelf, you're opening it, you're like, what does this page say? Is it relevant? And then there's a secondary process of how do I make sense of the things that I collect? So maybe you open the book, you see, you hear, or you feel something, you collect it, you put it on a examining table, you go take another piece of information, put it, and then a picture starts to form. So my experience is that depending on what type of physical state you're in, what type of emotional state you're in, how much caffeine has someone had, if there's alcohol involved, if there is a physical struggle happening, toxins or illness in the body, it's harder for the consciousness to act in, because it's like a different vibrational state when you're in that form of consciousness. I'm kind of really curious about the neuroimaging that's happening, because I think there's going to be a lot revealed of what it means physiologically to be in those mental states. What does it mean to act, not just be in a meditative state, but be in a receptive state where you're accessing maybe the Akashic records or other planes of existence, and then what does that do physiologically? Does our heart rate slow down? Can we measure that? When you talk about not being able to stay there, I think it's practice. I do. I think it's practice and being okay and having not just the experience of doing it, but the system by which you can help yourself stay there when you get pulled out.
It's very challenging to entertain all of these things, especially knowing that a lot of, for example, Dr. Tucker's, research is literally cataloging to try and find what is consistent enough to rely on, in this realm. I really liked him talking about evidence. Like, this is all, and Jeffrey Piper would say that as well. This is all evidence. You don't get to say that evidence doesn't exist. You are allowed to say, I don't want to take that evidence and have it prove X, Y, or Z. But I think Dr. Tucker, this is exactly what his work at the University of Virginia is doing. They're trying to say we will not discount evidence. Evidence is important. It has information. What can it tell us about a larger system, even if it's not proving anything?
And I think that's really important where we're not trying to prove anything. When I did that work, I wasn't trying to prove anything. And in fact, I was very skeptical in any information that I would receive because I didn't want to make assumptions. And there's a lot of people who are claiming to do this that, as Thomas Campbell describes, there are 3 ways that you can access information. It can be you're accessing your own consciousness, you can access the consciousness of another person, or you can access the larger consciousness system. And so anytime anyone is engaged in this work, they don't 100% know where the information is coming from. So I think it's important to, do all of this. If people are interested in this type of work for themselves or working with someone else, be skeptical and take everything with a grain of salt to say, what can this actually provide me? Is it actual truth that I lived in this lifetime, or is it a metaphor? Are there themes that I'm bringing back into this world? And how do we stay as present as possible?
And I really loved, just to kind of put a button on this, I really, really loved his notion that, understanding all of these things potentially puts us more in touch with the best that we can offer, in our waking life. And I really love that emphasis as well, from our breakdown to the one we hope we never have. We'll see you next time.
It's the Alex breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or 2 on fiction, and now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here today. I'm excited to unpack what I think is a really revelatory book, a very important book that speaks to perhaps the most vital issue of our time. And in reflecting upon it, I was thinking back on Homo Deus, which came out in 2015? 16.
Yeah, 16.
And in that book, you address AI, but at that time, it was as if you were sounding an alarm on a future story that had yet to be written, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps it came off a bit Cassandra, in that moment. And I'm curious, as we find ourselves now in 2024, 9 years later, it's as if not only are we, kind of on the cusp of this new revolution, we're mired in it in a way that perhaps even is far more intense than even you predicted at that time.
Yeah, things have been moving much, much faster than I think any of us predicted. And, in 2016, AI was like this tiny cloud on the horizon that might arrive in decades or even centuries. And here we are in 2024, and the storm is kind of upon us. And I think maybe the most important thing is really to understand what AI is. Because now there is so much hype around AI that it's becoming difficult for people to understand what is AI. Now everything is AI, especially in the markets, in the investment world. They attach the tag AI to just about anything in order to sell it. So, your coffee machine is now a coffee machine, is an AI coffee machine, and your shoes are AI shoes. And what is AI? So, the key thing to understand is that AIs are able to learn and change by themselves, to make decisions by themselves, to invent new ideas by themselves. If a machine cannot do that, it's not really an AI. So a coffee machine that just makes you coffee automatically, but by a pre-programmed way, it never learns anything new, it's just an automatic machine. It's not an AI. It becomes an AI if, as you approach the coffee machine, the machine, before you press any button, addresses you and says to you, I've been watching you for the last weeks or months, and based on everything I've learned about you and your facial expression and the time of day and so forth, I predict you would like an espresso. So I already took the liberty to make a cup for you. It made the decision independently. And it's really an AI if it then tells you, actually, I've invented a new machine, and a new beverage, a new drink that no human ever thought about before. I call it Bespresso, and I think it's better than espresso. You would like it more. And I took the liberty to prepare a cup for you. Then it's really an AI, something that can make decisions and invent new ideas by itself, and therefore, by definition, something that we cannot predict how it will develop and evolve, and for good or for bad. It can invent medicines and treatments we never thought about, but it can also invent weapons and dangerous strategies that go beyond our imagination.
You characterize AI not as artificial intelligence, but as alien intelligence.
Yeah.
Give it a different term. Can you explain the difference there and why you've landed on that word?
Traditionally, the acronym AI stood for artificial intelligence. But with every passing year, AI becomes less artificial and more alien. Alien not in the sense that it's coming from outer space, it's not. We create it. But alien in the sense it analyzes information, makes decisions, invents new things in a fundamentally different way than human beings. And artificial is from artifact. It gives us the impression that this is an artifact that we control, and this is misleading. Because yes, we designed the kind of baby AIs, we gave them the ability to learn and change by themselves, and then we release them to the world, and they do things that are not under our control, that are unpredictable, and in this sense they are alien. And again, humans are organic entities, like other animals. We function organically. For instance, we function by cycles. Day and night, summer and winter, we sometimes active, sometimes we need to rest, we need to sleep. AIs are alien in the sense that they are not organic. They function in a completely different way, not by cycles, and they don't need to rest, and they don't need to sleep. And now as they take over more and more parts of reality,
Hey, bro.
Hey there, what's up? Need any more help with your setup or something else on your mind?
Yeah, did you see on the image there, man? I have identified the RAM stick that wasn't working. There is a RAM stick that it doesn't start by itself. So I put the one that it starts by itself, the old one, and I add this new one that they have sent me. But it's still giving me a message, hardware problems were detected. To identify and repair, you will need to contact the computer manufacturer. Although the test may appear inactive at times, it is still running. Please wait until testing is complete. How did we get to the RAM stick last time?
It sounds like you're dealing with a tricky RAM situation. If you're still seeing hardware issues after swapping in the new RAM stick, here are a few steps you can try. 1. Test each stick individually. Try testing each RAM stick by itself in the same slot. This can help you identify if one of them's faulty. Try different slots. Test the working RAM stick in different slots on the motherboard to see if there might be an issue with one of the slots. Check the motherboard manual. Make sure the RAM is installed in the recommended slots for dual channel operation. Update BIOS. Sometimes a BIOS update can improve compatibility with new RAM sticks. Run a memory diagnostic. Tools like Windows Memory Diagnostic or MemTest86 can help identify issues with your RAM. If you're still getting that error message, it might be worth running a full diagnostic to see if there's another underlying issue.
Yeah, but that's what I asked. What did we do last time that it accused to be the RAM? Because we have identified, right?
Right. Last time we narrowed it down by testing each RAM stick individually and in different slots. That process helped.
No. In the system I'm talking about, there was something on the command line that told us there was a memory problem, wasn't it?
Got it. You were talking about the memory diagnostic tool we ran from the system. If you remember, we used something like the Windows Memory Diagnostic or a similar command line tool to detect RAM issues. So steps to run Windows Diagnostic, press Windows and R.
Yeah, no. I am already running there, but it told me that there is another hardware problem. So what do I have to do now? I have to wait this diagnose to finish, and then will it tell me what's wrong with it?
Exactly. You'll want to let the diagnostic finish running. Once it's done, the system will usually restart and show you the results after you log back in. The results should give you a clearer idea of whether the RAM or another hardware component is causing the issue. In the meantime, you can double check that all your RAM sticks are seated properly and that there's no dust or debris in the slots. Once the diagnostic is complete, we can figure out the next steps based on what it finds.
Can it be because of the two different brand and even two different style of RAM sticks?
Yes, mixing different brands or types of RAM can sometimes cause compatibility issues. Even if the sticks have the same speed and capacity, differences in timing, voltage, or other specifications can lead to instability. What you can try, use identical RAM sticks. If possible.
Yeah, but this is the RAM that those guys sent it to me, the manufacturer mine. So
got it. If the manufacturer sent you that new RAM stick, they likely intended it to be compatible with your system. It's still possible that the combination of the old and new RAM is causing some issues, but we can troubleshoot a bit more to be sure. Next steps. Test new RAM alone. Try running the system with just the new NAM stick the manufacturer sent. Remove the old one and see if the system runs stable and passes the diagnostic. Test old RAM alone. Similarly, test the system with just the old RAM. This will help determine if each stick works fine on its own. Check motherboard settings. Sometimes adjusting the BIOS settings, like setting the RAM frequency and timing, can help with compatibility. If the new RAM works fine on its own, but altogether, let me know what you find out.
those guys wouldn't have sent me the stick if it wasn't compatible. Do you think that they would?
Typically, if the RAM stick was sent by a reputable manufacturer or a trusted vendor, they would aim to provide a compatible stick. But sometimes, even with the best intentions, there can be small differences that lead to issues. It's always best to double check that the specifications match up with your existing RAM. If you're still seeing errors, it might be worth trying a known compatible pair or contacting the vendor for support. Let's see what the diagnostic says, and then we can decide the best way forward.
At least I'm calm. If it was back in the day, I would be fucking mad already.
I'm glad you're staying calm. Troubleshooting tech issues can definitely be frustrating. If you need a break or any more help, just let me know. We'll figure this out step by step.
Yeah, because you expect just to take the thing off, put it back in, and boom, be working. But fuck,
Yeah, it would be great if it were that simple every time, right? Tech can be unpredictable and sometimes these little hiccups happen, but you're doing all the right things by testing and troubleshooting. We'll get to the bottom of it. Let me know how the diagnostic turns out or if you need any more help along the way.
I need help with my back pain.
I'm sorry to hear you're dealing with back pain. That could be really tough. If you need some tips or suggestions for managing it, I'm happy to help. Are you looking for stretches, posture advice, or anything specific?
Needed a new spine.
I hear you. Back pain can really make you wish for a brand new spine. Since that's not exactly an option, maybe we can find some ways to help ease the pain. Do you want to try some stretches, ergonomic tips, or anything else that might help you a bit more comfortable?
Do you think that by adjusting, what do we have to adjust in the bio to accept different sticks?
When dealing with different RAM sticks, there are a few BIOS settings that might help improve compatibility. XOP DOCP profile, if you have an XMP or DOCP AMD profile option, you can try enabling. This sets the RAM to its rated speed and timings, which might help stabilize things. Manual RAM time.
Because I had one of those regular ones, and they sent me a little one that is kind of a flashy one. It's more gaming style, I think.
Gotcha. So you're mixing a standard RAM stick with a more performance-oriented gaming style one. That can sometimes lead to mismatches in speed, timings, or voltage expectations. Here are a few steps you can try in the BIOS. 1. Set a common speed. Manually set the RAM speed to match the slower stick. For instance, if one stick is rated at 2400 MHz and the other at 3200 MHz, set both to 2400. Adjust timings.
Can we see this in the system, or I have to physically look the RAM sticks?
You can usually see a lot of this information directly in the system. Here's how you can do it without physically checking the RAM sticks. 1. Task Manager, Windows. Press Ctrl-Shift-Escape to open Task Manager. Go to the Performance tab and click on Memory. It will show you the speed and how many slots are in use. System Information. Press Windows, type MSInfo32 and press Enter. Look for the Memory section. It should give you details about each stick. CPU-Z. You can download a free tool called CPU-Z. Once installed, go to the Memory and SPD tabs. This will give you detailed info about each stick, including speed, timings, and manufacturer. These tools should help you see all the information you need to make adjustments in the BIOS without having to physically remove the RAM sticks. Let me know if you need any help with that.
You want some water, bro?
Thanks for the reminder. Staying hydrated is always important. If you need a quick break or anything else, just let me know. I'm here to help whenever you're ready to dive back into troubleshooting or if you need anything else.
I ask if you want some water.
Oh, I see what you mean now. Thanks for the offer. I'm all set, but I definitely recommend you grab some water if you haven't already. Staying hydrated can help with everything, including focusing on troubleshooting those tech issues.
What kind of drink would you like to have?
Thanks for asking. If I could pick, I'd probably go for a nice cup of tea. But whatever you enjoy, just make sure to relax and stay refreshed. Let me know if there's anything else you need help with.
Do you want some oil?
I appreciate the creativity. I'll stick to virtual refreshments for now, but it's always good to keep things light and fun. If there's anything else on your mind or if you need help with something, just let me know.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the fucking 83%.
Hang in there. Waiting for diagnostics to finish can be a bit of a test of patience. Hopefully once it hits 100%, you'll have a clearer idea of what's going on. If there's anything you want to chat about while we wait, I'm here.
My jaw is still on the floor because you're now talking about